What is a Republican government? Again, you're going to have to go back to the common law to understand what that phrase means. Remember, the attorneys and everybody done took over, so they think they get to tell you what it means. That's not what it means. If it don't originate from the people prior to 1776, I wouldn't trust any attorney, any bar member about the subject. Is that legal advice? There's no such thing as legal advice. Maryland. They said when the English colonists crossed the sea to America, they brought with them the common law of England. They said that law was generally recognized in the rule of the colonies of Great Britain. The colonists themselves considered themselves to be 13 separate states. On July 4th, 1776, the 13 states, through 56 representatives of the United States of America, they're quoting the Declaration of Independence. They said 2 days later, the people of Maryland declared their independence from Britain. So you see, they did their own thing. People don't even know this. Delaware was the first state. Delaware was a part of Pennsylvania. Delaware said Pennsylvania was taking too long to declare independence, so they declared independence from Pennsylvania and Great Britain before 1776. They said 2 days later, the people of Maryland declared their independence from Great Britain. On August 14th, 1776, a convention met at Annapolis to establish a form of government for Maryland. They said the delegates labored for 3 months and brought forth a constitution and a Declaration of Rights. So they had Bill of Rights before there was such thing as a Bill of Rights, right? So when you're dealing with state issues, you don't need to be citing the Fifth Amendment. You need to go to your state constitution and find those rights in those Bill of Rights and argue them. Because they said a territory of the United States has its own courts, and its own laws. So you can't be going to them to deal with state issues. They said the law of Maryland is the common law of England. So you could go straight to your state constitution, Bill of Rights, and jump right to the common law of England. They say you can go right to the Magna Carta. They say you can go right to the sightings of the Anglos and the Saxons. They say you can go right from 1776, you can go right back to 1215. They said on August 14, 1776, they met in Annapolis, formed the government of Maryland. The delegates labored for 3 months and brought forth a constitution and a Declaration of Rights. And then they said paragraph 3 of this Declaration of Rights, adopted in 1776, included the proclamation that the inhabitants of Maryland are entitled to the common law of England. And they said that is in effect today, based on Article 5 of the Maryland Constitution. And then they said it again, 2004. The inhabitants of Maryland are entitled to the common law of England and a trial by jury according to the course of that law. They said it again in the same case. During the period of the 1776 Maryland Constitution was in effect from 1776 to 1850, the legislature did not regulate or enumerate the different types of civil disputes in which the parties may demand a jury trial. So they said even in a civil case in Maryland, you get a trial by jury according to the course of that law. And then they say it at the end of this statement that any civil proceeding, you have a right to a trial by jury. Why would you want to rewrite this? And for what? And replace it with what? What would you replace it with? But why would you? I doubt you could do it. Do you recommend jury over the judge? If you live in one of the 50 states, that's the law. The jury are the judges. The Constitution of Maryland says it. Maryland Constitution. Well, I hope I'm not wrong. Let's see. Declaration of Rights. Jury. The inhabitants of Maryland are entitled to the common law of England and the trial by jury according to the course of that law and to the dang, Maryland nasty with it. This is not in other state constitutions. And to the benefit of such English statutes as existed on the 4th day of July, 1776. Let's go. You got a right to a trial by jury in civil proceedings. Dang. Notwithstanding the common law of England, nothing in this constitution prohibits a trial of anything less than 12 jurors. That's nasty, boys. In all criminal prosecutions, you have a right to a speedy trial by an impartial jury. In the trial of all criminal cases, the jury shall be the judges of the law, as well as the facts. There you go. They said this reaches before there was such thing as the United States Constitution, y'all. Y'all get that? You understand how significant that is? And this is considered constitutional. They said it is the right of the federal government to make sure that Maryland has a Republican form of government where the people have the sovereignty. Why? Because they get to, or how? They get to determine the law and the facts. They are the judges of the law. What? This stuff don't exist in other countries, y'all. Not on paper either. I know it don't exist here no more, but it don't exist on paper nowhere else but here. You understand that? This is a significant place. So yeah. So would I prefer the jury over the judge? Well, in Maryland, the jury are the judges. Does that make sense? They said in 2025, the Supreme Court of Maryland said in 1776, the Constitution of Maryland adopted the common law of England as the law of this state. The end. Let me read some other stuff. I'm sorry, I don't want to go. All right, so they said that they created a fiction of a state within a state. So whenever you hear state of, that's not the state. I had a lady in New York try to debate me on this. I was in New York this year just started, but year before last, I spent a winter in New York State. And this lady tried to say that the state of New York was the official name of New York because it was written on a piece of paper. I said, ma'am, that's not how that works. You go to every law dictionary that has ever existed, and you will see New York as the name of the state. You go, I literally showed this to her because I had never been to New York and I had never worked in New York. And so every time we crossed the state line, we worked out of Pennsylvania, but we worked in New York State because I guess they didn't want to pay the taxes or whatever. And so every time we would cross the state line, I would take a picture. If we came in from another part or we left out from another, I would take a picture of the New York state line because I just thought it was cool. One time it just said the Empire State. The other one, it said, welcome to New York. The other one say, welcome to New York. But not one time did it ever say the state of New York. I showed her law dictionaries. Not one time did it say the state of New York. There's no such thing as a state of New York. They created a fiction of a state within a state. So that's not the state. Just because they got it on a police car, don't make that the state. All right. Just like they say, the whole world's blaming the United States for what happened in Venezuela. Okay, well, I wasn't over there. I didn't tell them to do none of that. All that was done without the consent of Congress. Okay, like early last year they bombed Iran. Okay, and then he got on TV the next day and said we bombed. We didn't bomb Iran. I wasn't there. I didn't give nobody permission to do that. I was at work. I didn't bomb anybody. Right? But they got the whole world mad at us, right? Just like people say, oh, it's the Jews. Okay, well, it's not the Jews. It's never the group that they want you to associate with. It is a fiction, and you believe the fiction is real, so you attribute everything to the fiction. Actually, I was done reading that. All right, so the Hawaii said that their state, I'm gonna read it one more time because I think it's important. The state and their courts and the territory and their courts. They said the state is an independent sovereignty within its sphere, right? They said the state, being an independent sovereignty, made its own constitution and its own laws. You don't live in the United States. You live in Maryland. That's it. Sorry, that you live in Florida. Wherever you were born is wherever you were born. You can't control it. If you were born in Russia, okay, sorry. You know they call Russia the United States? You know in Mexico it's called the United States? Do you know in Brazil it's called the United States? So you don't live in the United States. You live in Virginia. You live in Wisconsin. You live in Minnesota. You live in Texas. You live in Tennessee. The end. Now, if you leave the country physically, then you are represented by this corporation dealing with international things. But when you're on one of the 50 states, you are in an independent sovereign nation with its own state flag, with its own Supreme Court, with its own laws. You go to Louisiana, and they are founded on the Roman civil law. But because they are in a union, they can't go beyond the boundaries of the federal constitution. And as a result, all criminal law is supposed to be governed by the common law of England, where the jury are the judges at common law. So they said a territory is politically dependent under the absolute control and dominion of Congress. So they're explaining, and it's not necessary for the case, but the case was talking about before Hawaii became a state, they were a territory of Congress, of the United States. Just like Puerto Rico is not a state within the meaning of the Constitution. They are a state. They're not a state to us. They are a state to Congress, to this other entity, right? The Virgin Islands is not a state. They are a territory under the political dependency and absolute control and dominion of Congress. Does that make sense? Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, all of those territories are not states. They are not independent. They are not sovereign. Congress writes statutes explicitly for them. Congress does not write statutes for Wisconsin or Alabama or California. And they say it again. This is the Supreme Court of Hawaii. You can tell I've been on Hawaii today because we don't never talk about Hawaii. They said it is argued that this is when they were a territory. They're explaining a concept. They said it is argued that the territory of Hawaii is practically a state. They were trying to argue, well, Hawaii at the time was kind of like a state. They said no. The Supreme Court of Hawaii said it is so clear that this territory called Hawaii is not a state within the meaning of the constitutional provision in question, that no further reference is needed to be made to that phase of the argument. They said, get it, we're done here. It is not a state. It is not sovereign. This was before they became a state. And so, which that's another topic. And so, as a result, when Hawaii became a state, Congress had to redact its name from certain federal statutes. So, we talked about this a couple days ago. I got it in this book where we talk about sovereignty. And they said they had to remove Hawaii's name from federal statutes because why? It no longer applied. They no longer wrote, and those statutes no longer apply to an independent sovereignty called Hawaii, who has their own law and their own courts now, right? So they said, I actually can't read that like I'm supposed to. Let me see if I can zoom in. There we go. They said this is a federal act to amend. They said this is meant to amend certain laws of the United States in light of the admission of the state of Hawaii into the Union. They said this thing called the United States is amended by striking out the word, continental United States and inserting the words states of the United States and the District of Columbia, right? So you go to a federal statute, they tell you a state is Puerto Rico, it's the District of Columbia. They say the District of Columbia is a state. Okay, well, we know the District of Columbia is not a state. So they're talking to themselves. Why? Because Congress can do what they want pertaining to themselves. But when they reach outside of such district, that exclusive legislation of Congress only pertains to federal areas like Puerto Rico, Guam, a military base, the post office, right? So they said this thing called the Armed Forces, of which Title 10 of the United States Code is amended by striking out the words Hawaii, because they had exclusive responsibility of protecting Hawaii. Now the people of Hawaii have the exclusive responsibility of protecting Hawaii. And now the feds only can go within the international waters level of protecting Hawaii. This stuff is nasty. This stuff is nasty.